We have an amazing young lady. Now, I'm gonna kick us off like this. Okay, typically I do a disclaimer, yada yada yada, use your resources, blah blah blah, so on and so forth, dial 988, so on and so forth. What have you, right? But I'm not going to start off with the resources today. All right. I kind of got a resentment toward people from her country right now. So I'm going to
What?
open this off. Boss lady, you need to come get your weather. It's in my backyard. Oh, Lordy. That's what I wanted to start us off with. And I'm saying that because I'm in the Carolinas and it is absolutely nothing but snow and ice. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired.
We
I've
just
been
want
here
to
for
spread the love. That's all. You need to have a little bit of that down there, you know. Oh, good.
right. Right. No, seriously though, all jokes aside, I do not have a resentment toward Canadians, but I had to start us off that way because it was a very phenomenal way of starting us off. uh, all jokes aside, let's get straight into business. On the One Moment podcast, you might be triggered today. Okay. There's no telling where our show goes from one moment to the next. We just don't know. So if you are triggered, please utilize your resources in your local community, local emergency departments, local crisis centers, even call your therapist up, text your therapist, do whatever you got to do, your psychiatrist, talk to people, reach out for help. Now, with that being said, since we got the disclaimer, both of them times two out of the way, remember the weather was the first one. Listen, we need no introduction. Miss Lisa is from Canada. She's visiting us from Canada, and she is an amazing young lady. She's here to because she is an author, and she is a also a woman. And our goal on this podcast is to talk about anything in between women's issues, LGBTQI, African American, mental health, suicide, substance use. So let's get it started with Miss Lisa. How are you
Hey,
doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you for agreeing to come on here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's always nice to chat with folks on the other side of the border and share our snow with you. It's great.
Right. Listen, only if we could borrow like 40 degrees from Flow Rider, as I like to say.
Yes, it's true. We'd like that once in a while. And it's so sunny here today. It's gorgeous, actually. It's really white. It's beautiful. Sun is shining, but I feel like spring is around the corner and I cannot wait for that moment. Like I like the winter, but this is a little too much.
Right. I had a friend of mine in Canada send me a picture of her house with all the snow.
Yeah.
Snow is up to the bottom of her window. I mean, y'all have like 4 or 5 feet depending on where you at up there, and it's like
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
good. I'm good.
It's fun. You have to embrace winter. The Finns always say there's no bad weather, there's only bad clothing. So I just, you have to embrace the weather. You have to get outside. You have to figure out what winter sports you like, and then it's great. If you hate winter and you don't go outside, then you're in trouble. I don't know. I can't help you.
No, absolutely. So, how many books do you have written now? Let's go ahead and get into it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so I have 3 published books. I have 2 sitting on the laptop that need to be dealt with. I have, a cozy mystery 2 cozy mysteries coming out March, 1 in March, 1 in April, and a 3rd in August. So, I don't know how many is that? Various stages of publication, but definitely 3 that are out in the public already.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Where can they purchase your books at? And
So
what
any
is the name of them?
Yeah, so the first one is called Surviving Stutthof: My Father's Memories Behind the Death Gate. And that one is sort of the most personal one because it was about my dad. He was 16 in a Nazi concentration camp. And he told me his story when he was 84. So that was, an eye-opening experience. The second one was a historical novel called Sister's Winter War, and that one was inspired by what my dad was telling me about the Winter War between Finland and Russia. And he was a young boy when that was happening, but I was interested in what were the women doing during the war, like during that conflict. So I wrote a book about they're called Lotta Svarts, and they're sort of a paramilitary organization that helped during the wartime. And the third one just came out last fall called like Water for Weary Souls. And it's more of a historical mystery set in my hometown, which is in Northern Ontario. It's a mining town. And I set it during the Depression. And I wanted to write about Finnish immigrant women and what life was like for them. And I have a mystery embedded in it. One of the sisters is found, that her body is found in Nolan Creek, and the other sister knows it wasn't an accident and needs to figure out what happened. So I'm kind of like into the historical stuff, and then these cozy mysteries are contemporary and lighter and more fun. So I kind of, delving into different genres at this stage.
It's beautiful, beautiful, and I'm actually interested in let's exploring some women's issues, and especially from a historical perspective, because women finally got rights in the U.S. What, Trev, in the '60s or something like that? That was back in your day growing up.
It was earlier than that. It was around 1918 or somewhere like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't know.
But it still is a slow development, and there's been a lot of activity since the mid to late 50s and the transition of openness into many different issues that they're having to deal with, and more accessibility and working together to project their open collective voice out there. So it's been a slow progress.
Definitely. And, we see some of those things being rolled back. So that's the scary part at this time of our history. But, I forget what the saying is, but that trajectory is always working towards justice over time. So we may have setbacks, but we're moving forward.
Absolutely. So one of the things for me about some of the issues that men and women have to deal with, or women and men, I mean, there's only two kinds of human beings to me. So it's really been complicated lately at different issues when people can't seem to recognize which group they belong in. And that's a conflicting thought process for me, but I'm trying to adapt and overcome the issues too. So as far as the main part of the initiation for you to start writing books about this, where was like the main beginning for it? Was it just a relationship with your dad? He started sharing his story with you from World War II, or where did it begin?
Yeah, great question. I have been writing stories in my head before I could write. I was drawing pictures and telling myself stories and playing games and telling myself stories and getting neighborhood kids together and, putting on plays that I wrote in my head. And so I've always been a storyteller. And I studied English at university and became an English teacher and creative writing teacher. But it wasn't until my dad agreed to, do this story that I finally thought, okay, this is like, I have to do this now. He was 84. Like, how much time do you wait before you start to pursue these projects? And
right.
He agreed. I wasn't sure. I'm not sure that he was quite ready to do it. And that's how we started. We made a decision to just start doing interviews, and I would write notes and begin that process. And I started studying at University of Toronto, a creative writing program, because I just wanted to up my skills as a creative writer, because I was doing a lot of academic work at the time, doing a master's degree and all those kinds of things. So, it kind of just evolved. Like, I was always a storyteller. I always wrote stories in high school, and I loved literature, and I was always into that. But It was really my dad. I can attribute to the fact that I am now a full-time writer and book coach. So I can thank him for all kinds of things. But, this traumatic experience that he had to go through and his willingness to tell me that story at that age, because he had really suppressed it for years and years and years. It was really
Absolutely.
powerful, and like, I'm so grateful that he was willing to do that, because I didn't understand what had happened to him, and my family didn't understand all the details, and he told people bits and pieces, but not, everything. And I knew I couldn't tell my kids about what had happened. So now we have that story as best as he could tell it, because I'm sure there are things that he suppressed and could never go back to. But we do have a great deal of what happened during that time period and what it was like for him.
Right. And what country did he come from?
He was born in Oulu, Finland. So
Okay.
Nordic country, bordering Russia on the east and Sweden on the
Yeah.
left. And so, it was a difficult time period. The Russians, the Soviet Union came in. The Winter War started in 1939. My dad was just 10, maybe bordering on 11. And World War II broke out, and he was, too young to be a soldier fighting the Russians. So he became a merchant marine sailor. He was too young to do that too, but he lied about his age, as many young men did at the time, and ended up aboard this merchant marine ship in the Baltic, delivering war materials to different locations. And his ship, along with 3 other ships, were arrested in Poland in September 1944. So he was just 16 at the time. 90 plus Finnish sailors, a couple of them were women, were sent to Stutthof concentration camp. And he endured 2 death marches, and like the most horrific day of liberation. The stories go on and on and on and on about what happened to him.
Absolutely.
And he was 16, but at 84, you could still see how traumatic that was for him, and how difficult to tell those, to return to those memories. It's hard for people, but also important to do it, right? If we don't talk about the things that happened to us and we suppress them, I think you can never release it. And I don't think he ever, we talk about writing as therapy, but I don't really think I hesitate about saying it's therapy. I think it's an aspect or a strategy or something you can use, but it's not, you really need professionals. And in his day, people coming out of the war may have had PTSD, but they were not diagnosed. We didn't talk about it in that way. If it happened now, he would be absolutely getting help. He would absolutely having counseling and all of those things, but he just lived with it and sort of suppressed it and had night terrors for his whole life. But at 84, when he told me his stories, it was really interesting to see him come to book events with me and sit down to sign copies of the book to the public. And and he would, like, people would ask him questions and he would just speak openly. And I'm like, who are you? Like, I spent months trying to get stories out of you, and you were like holding back, holding back, holding back. And now with these strangers, like, you were ready to talk about it. But I think there's something got released there. Like, it was okay to talk about the stories. It was okay to reveal what happened. And so I think there was some healing there of some kind. But, you really never, ever, in his case, go beyond that. Like, he did not, he continued to have night terrors after that. It wasn't like magically gone.
Right.
But
I have to agree with the concept of, number one, and I'm like I'm a grammar Nazi with the English language. So your aspects and your learning in English is phenomenal to me, because I can totally relate to that. I'm like punctuality and sentence structure and all these things that are supposed to be basic functions and taught to us, that helps us develop the understanding that even if it's in a foreign language, we can still translate it to English somehow. So I'm just amazed by what I believe is the best thing in the fact that your dad is an elderly man, and he became, there was like a pivoting point where he could be open with things that he wasn't open with before. So that was like a self-care kind of progression. And for him to be open to strangers is just one of the biggest blessings that we can have. And you being able to use language, English, and talk to each other about it is part of the healing process. So I just, it's astounding how really, to me, how cool it is just using language. You've developed it to where you've written books now, and you're addressing issues that are dismissed and discouraged and not talked about. So he's translated the aspects of these things to you so that your progression goes forward. So it's a continuum, and it's just a really, really, really awesome way to get things open, specifically with all the issues that humanity has to deal with, not only women, but also men and any other gender that there could possibly be. So using language is a very important tool to throw in the old toolbox.
100%. Like, storytelling is one of the oldest way we taught each other, right? Like, if you go back to the earliest times, and how did we teach children to be safe and to be aware of their surroundings, and so that they wouldn't be like, I don't know, saber-toothed tiger going after them or something. Like, we told them stories, and we told them stories around the campfire. And some of those stories were a little scary. You know, don't go out into there, and don't do that. And we, like, that's how we are wired as human beings, to tell stories and to understand stories. So we can talk about all of the individuals who were affected by the Holocaust. And I can tell you the statistics, and I can tell you which, the countries, like there are 25 nationalities in the concentration camp my father was in. That is kind of like, it's important to understand. But when you tell the story about one person and we are emotionally connected to that person, now we understand what happens, right? So it's through story and language that we're able to convey. And in my dad's case, this was a truthful story. It was what happened to him, and it's unique to him. Other people had similar stories or different stories, but everyone has a unique story. But I also write fiction, and the same thing applies. You're writing about people, you've made them up in your head, but they still connect to readers because we're fundamentally driven to understand stories and how they affect us emotionally and help us go into the footsteps of those people and experience what they've experienced. Like, there's brain studies that show that our brain is activated in the way that, like, if you're reading about, I don't know, running away, you're going to feel like you're running away with that character. Like, your brain actually changes. And I think that's so cool because writers can use that as a opportunity to engage the reader, but the reader gets to experience things they would never have experienced otherwise, and change emotionally and have a better understanding of their world and humanity and where, what they believe. And so I think, like, there's nothing more powerful than stories, whether they're true or whether they're fiction.
I do have a question for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, let me preface my question. Growing up in high school, middle school, you read about slavery and you read about stuff like that happened in the U.S. And really, that's one thing, right? And then, of course, you meet people like Ruben, who was another co-host on here, who hasn't showed up in probably almost a year, and I'm gonna kick his ass for not showing up. Who grew up during Jim Crow. He's also African American, experienced a lot of that stuff. And so to hear him share his experiences in this story is a complete different ball game when compared to studying about it, reading about it, having to take an exam and this, that, and the third, right? Same thing with, studying about culture, right? You're studying about culture and stuff like that. And it's one thing to read a little chapter in a little cultural counseling book versus going through and having a whole cultural experience
Yeah.
itself. Something that a book cannot teach you, cannot show you, can't even explain to you. What was your experience like, out of curiosity, when you started learning about, the Holocaust,
Yeah.
concentration camps, compared to like when you were taught that in school? Like what was your experience in there? Because my experience was very cathartic, I'm gonna say spiritual too, in a sense, because it was like, wow, like, it just, books do not really uh achieve the ultimate goal of. Does that make sense?
I can see that as being a perspective for sure. So for me, when I was in grade 10, that's when we study about World War II and the Holocaust. So I already understood my dad had s- something had happened, but I didn't know what had happened at that time. So I was really interested in World War II and in the Holocaust right from that age. And I knew I was going to write a book about my dad. I probably voiced that because it came back later. And my mom said, okay, I think it's time to write that book, when I was 40. Um, so when we decided that we were going to write this book, of course, I read everything I could get my hands on. I read all about the concentration camps, about World War II, about the Finnish-Russian Winter War. I read about the merchant marine ships. And I read a lot of Holocaust survivor stories. One of the reasons I wanted to read so many of those accounts was so that I could, I call it like putting on armor. I'm a fairly sensitive person. Um, I was worried that I would start interviewing my father and start crying. Like, that is not going to go well if I'm sobbing and he's trying to tell me his story. Like, I just knew I needed to go there, quite professionally in a way. And so understanding the worst of what could happen, the worst thing that he could have endured, all of the kinds of punishments, all the like everything, the death marches, the many, many, many ways people died in those camps. There's many ways. That helped me so that when I went to sit down to talk to him, um, nothing could shock me. The problem is it's your own father telling you that it happened to him. And so that's a whole other level, right? Like you say, reading it, intellectually understanding it is one thing. So the information, the academic research, that part was very important to do. But it's like you said, like learning something at school, it's kind of dry. Then you read the memoirs, and they're people's actual lived experiences. And now that's when the emotional impact is hitting, because now you see how they felt and what happened to them individually. And then speaking to my father, whole other level of understanding, right? Because now he's telling me what happened to him, and it's my dad. So that brought like the history and the learning and the concentration camps and his experience together. And then I did something else. I went with my husband to Poland, and we went to the place where he was arrested, and the four ships were arrested. We didn't take a train, which is how my father, he would have been in a cattle car, but we took a bus that was going through the countryside and then through the forest, and there was a sort of a narrow gauge track beside us, which very well could have been the same train tracks he was on. And we got off at Stutthof, a concentration camp, where we had an English. It was a Polish guide, but he spoke English, and he gave us a tour, like just for my husband and I. He knew what my project was. He knew what I was working on. He himself had been a 16-year-old Polish concentration camp survivor, but his concentration camp was in Germany. So he understood why I was there. And he brought me around and explained all of the things. And now I'm not just like I haven't just learned the facts, and I haven't just read about the memoirs, and I haven't just heard from my father. I'm standing on the ground that he was talking about. I see the things he was talking about. And that is a completely life-changing moment. And then at the end of that tour, this lovely Polish guide and I just like we were so professional right up until then. And then we were just sobbing, the two of us, because he knew how important it was for me to be there and to tell this story. And I understood better what he probably had gone through too. So there's this like really visceral connection. So yeah, I agree with you to some extent, like reading and going to a class and you can absorb knowledge and you need to do that. But the closer you can get to the experience, like I can't go back to 1944, but I can go back to those places and not everything's there, but there are remnants of those places still there. And there are some buildings still there. And they have so like the one thing you can say about the Nazis is they kept impeccable records. They documented everything. They filmed everything. Like it's and so that's why I never understand Holocaust deniers because they they kept all these right like we know all these people have been there. Anyways, that's not the topic, but yeah, so I see what you're saying about this the written aspect of it, but sometimes we can't get as close as having been the person who was there or having been the person who is witnessing it 70 years later. Sometimes the closest we can get is a memoir or a book about the topic that will get us close to the heart of the matter. And I think that's why it's so powerful because otherwise, what are we going to do? Just be like, well, I don't know anything about that. so it's not important. So important and probably more important today than it was when we wrote this book, 10 years ago. So I don't know. It's so there's sort of levels of of understanding there in terms of the power of these experiences.
That's an amazing part of your story. And what it says to me is that you had to transition from a physiological change in your brain for the understanding and developing the language aspect of it into an emotional experience because you were actually there where your dad was and living part of it. Even if he wasn't with you, there's another individual that was actually had done the experience as well. So you're having your own experience transition onto you so that your aura, your inner spirit, your mental capacity and of understanding was advanced more. So it's making full circle around from 100%. the personal aspect of it. And it's just, it's, I get the idea that a lot of people, they're like, well, it didn't happen to me, and so why should I be interested in it? But unless you utilize your language and your capacity to read and understand other people's stories, it can give you that lived experience, even if you're just reading about it. So the full circle of going from physiological to emotional and internalize everything is just a very powerful thing. So to me, we're kind of going a little bit off track, and we got a great conversation with that. But as far as your development in your book writing, how did it transition specifically to go from a gender thing, from male to female, and you're promoting the woman? Let's talk a little bit about that.
That would be my next question.
That's
like
such
Trevor, you.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to read your mind.
No, that's okay because I was going to ask that question next. Thank you for bringing it up.
I think that's a great
You're
question.
welcome, my friend.
Trevor, it was like there was never a decision for me to do like the next book is this. Or I'm going to focus on this. So it was never a question of gender. It just happened. So I can talk about how. So when I was writing, this is Surviving Stotov, I was taking these University of Toronto courses, and one of the courses, like we had to take courses in fiction and nonfiction, and which was great because I loved writing this nonfiction. I loved writing about my dad's experiences, that it was like a transformative time in my life. And I'm so blessed to have had that opportunity to get to know him so well. But during this course, I had to do all kinds of courses in various things. And so fiction is my first love. Like, it actually was where I started writing as a kid. So I took a course in fiction, and they said, okay, well, we want you to come up with some pages for a story. And I thought, well, what am I going to write about? And I was kind of like deep into writing Surviving Stutthof, just like so immersed into the time period. And I thought, well, okay, why don't I just pick something from that time period that's a little different from what I'm working on, but will also help me inform my writing for this. So, often when you're writing, you ask yourself a question like, what was happening with, or what would happen if. So I was thinking about the Winter War, which is a really significant moment in Finnish history, because it's that David and Goliath story, right? Little tiny country of Finland against this behemoth of Russia, of the Soviet Union. And so I was fascinated by that. My dad had already told me a little bit about what that was like for him as a kid. So I thought, okay, I can explore this a bit more. And I thought, okay, so who am I gonna write about? What am I gonna do next? And I started thinking about my grandmother. So her name was Anna-Liisa Kovala, and my name is Anna-Liisa Kovala. And I thought, okay, what was she doing during this time period? She has young sons at war. She's got this young boy at home who's like kind of wanting to like go. He's like, school's done because school's not on while there's a war going on, and there's bombs raining down on your hometown. So I'm thinking about my grandmother. And then I start thinking about my aunts and other women who were involved in the war effort, because we do have a ton of stories about the Winter War, nonfiction and fiction. And I've read probably most of them and really, really interesting. And I'm like, what's missing here is what were the women doing? So that's where it starts, right? It's like, where's the gap in what we know about something? And so I'm like, okay, let's find out. And that's when I found out about these Lotta Svarts. And if you look into different countries during World War II, there were women doing a lot of different things, like different kinds of like some women are spies. There's women we know about who were pilots. Like, every country has sort of women doing something maybe surreptitiously or hired to do, like there were snipers. Like, there's so many fascinating stories that are kind of untold, because we've already had decades and decades of men's stories, and rightfully so, because the men were integral to the war effort. But we've heard their stories, and we've heard their stories, and now we're getting the women's stories, because they are untold, and they had did some really amazing things. So I decided to make my character a young woman whose father goes to war. She's responsible for her younger sisters. The youngest sister is sent, as many children were, to Sweden for her protection. Not all children that Finnish war children ended up having a very good experience there. Some had great experiences, some did not. That's a whole other thing, and I've actually written another book about Finnish war children, because that also inspired me to go like, what was happening there? Like, that question always pops up. And then I decided I would make her sort of a nurse's assistant, somebody who could travel to the front lines, who could witness what that was like, who was responsible at one point in the story to, as many women did, wash the dead, preparing them, like unfreeze them first and wash them and
Wow.
prepare them to be sent home to their families. Can you imagine what that would have been like psychologically?
No.
Unbelievable. So I learned all about these women. And so this little assignment I had for my class turned into a novel, because you start going down that path and you realize there's so much here, there's so much I want to know. I actually wrote that whole story of this young woman from the beginning to end, and then realized, oh, she's not leaving me alone. I still want to know what happened to her. So I wrote another part with her coming to Northern Ontario with her husband, and this part is mostly set in 1980, and she's taking care of her own granddaughter, and she gets early onset Alzheimer's. And that allowed me to play with memory and loss and family and sisterhood and all kinds of interesting issues that came up in the first part. And then I was weaving those two stories together. So so the evolution of a story rarely starts with, I'm going to write a story about this gender or that gender. It starts with a question and a
Right.
curiosity that leads you down this path. And then you're like, what? I didn't know that happened. I didn't know those people were doing that. And then the Alzheimer's part became because my dad got Alzheimer's in the end. And I witnessed all kinds of strange behavior, both fascinating and deeply disturbing and scary. And, I had all the emotions around it. And I thought, oh my gosh, he told me his story in time. Because had he not told me then, I would never have been able to get all those stories from him. And so when I was writing about my female character, who was part of the Winter War, I was modeling a lot of her behavior after things I witnessed with him. And part of that was me trying to internalize and understand what might my dad have felt like when he knew things weren't right, but he hadn't lost enough of his memory to that he understood that there's something wrong. Like that kind of transitional moment between, like, full Alzheimer's, they're not going to remember that they don't remember. But there's a moment in between where things aren't right. And I know my dad covered. I know I remember one moment where he'd get visitors in the hospital, and he'd be like upbeat and talking to them, and how are you, and having a conversation, and they'd leave, and he'd look at my mom and say, like, who was that? Like, he didn't know, but he knew how to cover for that, because he understood that there was a role of, like, I have to be the host here. I have to have conversation, but he didn't know who those people were, and that, relatives or close friends. So I was so fascinated by what was happening with him, even though it was so devastating, that I think part of my processing it was writing that story with this woman. So yeah, this is how these things happen, right? Like, you get an idea, and then you're like, I'm on it. I'm gonna, like, you just go down the path. Does that kind of answer your question, Trevor?
Yes, it does. Yes, it absolutely does. And I'm glad that you could share that with us and everyone else too, because it's more openness to the transition of going from reading and understanding and language, and so much involved in meshing together for the right thing for you.
Yeah,
And that's what's important.
absolutely. Yeah, I have to agree with you. And I think that regardless of it, if your characters are male or female or any other gender, it's the human experience that draws us all to a story, right? Like, it's a universal experience that helps us understand these stories. So, I don't think, like, for instance, Surviving Stutthof is for male readers like that. No, it's for all readers because
Right.
you're going to learn about humanity and yourself, and have those kind of reactions that teach you about the world, and just how we experience it. Like Sisters Winter War, not like, although there's a female protagonist, not like a woman's book. Although, like, the publishers like to categorize books into women's fiction or this or that. I guess that's a way to know where to shelve them. I don't know. But it's not necessarily that. It's reading for the story and what happens to people. I think that's really much more important than, dividing people in yet another category.
Right.
I'm curious to find out or to ask. Um, After reading a lot and doing a lot of training in, different in various cultures, and you're writing in the history of the Nazi Germany, and then of course women's, experiences and stuff like that. Out of everything that you've written and you've read and you've studied and you've kind of put everything to together, what kind of sticks out to you, at that time was new that you never heard, or maybe it was like a myth that kind of like busted through. Like for me,
Yeah.
when I was going through my grad school, I grew up thinking that all Chinese and Asians were some of the smartest people on the planet, and actually, it was a bias that I was having when I was thinking
Mm,
like that. Right? I
mm,
didn't know that till I actually got to studying. I'm like, oh wow, okay. And especially when you categorize them and say, oh yeah, all of these folks are IT and brilliant with IT. Well, there's a lot of those populations that they don't deal with IT, they don't deal with engineering, they don't deal with that stuff, or even computer technology. So that was a lot of biases that I had to work on. So that's why I asked, like, what do you feel like kind of stands out to you as kind of like maybe
yeah.
change your thoughts or what have you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm hesitating because some things were like some of the research confirmed what I knew, and some things were eye-opening. Um, Nothing's really sticking out for me in particular, but I can say that um, when I learned about Stutthof concentration camp, and it was the first concentration camp built outside of Germany and the last one to be liberated. And it was notoriously brutal. Like people didn't survive it. I can tell you, we went to United States Holocaust Memorial Museum as a family. My dad had always wanted to go, and I said, "Well, we're working on this project. Let's go." We rented a car, a big van. My husband, myself, with two kids, my mother-in-law, my mom, and my dad, and all our stuff. Drove from Canada to Washington to go to this museum, and we walked into the Holocaust Museum. And I don't know if you've been there. It's an amazing building. It's brick and steel girders and light, and it's both beautiful and oppressive and moving. Like the moment you walk in, it just has this atmosphere. So, we were figuring out, okay, where do we go get our, do the things? And my dad beelined it right to the back of the room where there was a table and a woman sitting there. And the woman starts chatting with him. And of course, she's a Holocaust survivor. The only day of the week she goes to the museum is on a Wednesday morning at 10 or whatever for a couple hours. Forget what time. And so she says, "Well, where were you?" And he said, "Well, I was in Stutthof." And she said, "So was I." "How old were you?" "I was 16." "So was I," she said. The two of them connected in 3 seconds flat. They were crying and hugging each other. We just arrived. Like, what are the chances that we would go on the very day that she was at the Holocaust Museum? And she had been volunteering there for decades and decades and decades. So this was nothing new for her. But for us, it's like the one trip we're making, like with solely to go there. We had no idea. And, other people, other employees that were there, other volunteers, everyone was in tears over this sort of a reunion, although they probably never met each other. But she said, like, the thing is, she's met Holocaust survivors for decades, but she almost never meets people from Stutthof because people didn't survive Stutthof. It was so notoriously brutal. So that was really eye opening. The other thing that was very eye opening for me about that camp was when I learned that there were 25 or 26 different nationalities. Because I think we have this thought that it's this group of people or maybe that group of people. We don't necessarily see that it was anyone who opposed Nazism. So, 90 Finnish sailors alongside a big group of Norwegian policemen were housed there, and people of all nationalities. So the idea that it was one targeted group, yes, like I'm not going to suggest it wasn't, but everybody who opposed Hitler was right for being put in the concentration camp. So I think that was um, maybe because I didn't understand how widespread it was that when I read that figure, that stuck with me. Because you think, okay, well, why would the Finns be put into a concentration camp? And then you realize, oh no, everybody, the doctors, the lawyers, the teachers, the ministers, like anyone with any education is put in. Like you just go down the list of people, and it's like, so it was shocking. So it's just one of those things that stuck with me for years.
That makes sense to me, because what you just said explains to me my cognitive understanding that besides the 3 to 4 million of people from Israel or Judean or Jewish descent, which are like the main group, a lot of people don't realize, unless they do their own research and read and understand the language on the literature aspect of it, or just English understanding, realizes that there was over 22 million people that were affected by this in a very violent way, and they were from all over the world, not just Jewish people. So
that's right.
And please don't get triggered or upset with me saying that, but it's the humanity part of it that I wanted to bring awareness to. But it is crucially, the main ones were specifically the Jewish people, but it did affect all of humanity. And I didn't know until this podcast episode that Finnish people were in there, or Norwegians, or possibly Sweden.
It's one of those
that's
crazy,
just a very disturbing thing.
Yeah, it's crazy because well, like if I think of that particular concentration camp that I went to, definitely the Jewish section, it was enormous. And so it was used not only for a work camp. Some people were brought in and then sent to Auschwitz and Birkenau and different places. So it was a transit camp for some people. It was like many people like were put to death there. There was a gas chamber. Like, I mean, everything that you know about concentration camps was part of that experience. But I think you're right. It's that we have to remember that like this affected everybody, every nation, so and that's not to downplay what, like the Holocaust was really targeted at the Jewish population. But to add to the stories of other nations to remind us that no one is safe, and that we need to learn from history, but we're not very good at it, right? Like we can see things happening.
Absolutely.
And that's why we have to keep telling these stories, because we kind of like, oh, well, that was that group and that was that, and that happened over there because of that, and it doesn't affect me. And then we see things unrolling and unraveling, and we don't always realize that, oh, this is sort of like what happened in the past, and maybe we should be paying attention to what's going on. And to think that individually we're all safe. We're not, if we're not vigilant, if we're not aware, if we're not paying attention to what's going on in our political situations and all of the things. So, I feel like the story was important to be told for my father, for sure, and for my family specifically, and for my children. But all of these stories are important for the world to understand what has happened, and that history does repeat itself. It just looks different, right? It's just happens in different places.
So what you just described, once again, something that brings to my mind is, in this One Moment podcast, and I mentioned something about it today on an earlier social media post, that we have a collective and collaborative mission, ethically based on bringing awareness to breaking all the stigmas and the stereotypical and the cultural, spiritual, religion, all these issues that we talk about here on this podcast. And it's so important to me to develop it in such a way where we can all come together and talk about these things openly, because if you don't talk about them and let everyone's voice be heard, or their story, whatever their experience, strength, and hope is, can affect another human being, for the betterment of us all. And so having you as our guest today is an extremely great privilege to understand a little bit better what I thought I understood about World War II and the effect of Nazism and who it affected and how it affected them. There are things that I learned in this episode because I'm like a human being like anyone else. I thought I knew a lot of stuff, and I don't. Don't get me wrong, I understand a lot because I'm the grammar guy. But that is a blessing and a gift in itself too. So I just want to say how enormously humbly grateful we are to have you with us here today, and how privileged it is for you to share everything that you're doing and advancing women's voices to be heard better. That it's work. We appreciate you being here with us.
Wow, that's so kind, Trevor.
And I just had that was kind of on my heart, and I thought I'd just get it out there. But it's a really big privilege, and I'm just very happy to have you here with us today.
That's lovely. Thank you, Trevor. That's so kind. It's my pleasure.
So I'm curious to know then, right? Because we're talking about women's issues, we're talking about the Holocaust, we're talking about a lot of things. And you did answer one of my questions earlier too. I was going to ask you.
She even said law enforcement Finnish people were in there, and I'm like, what?
Yeah, Norwegian policemen.
Right. No, 100%. Like, I've learned so much because, I mean, I was taught that it was Jews, and then to hear that it was 25 plus nationalities, I'm like, whoa, hold on, what?
Yeah.
And then you also answered one of my questions. There's a lot of people that says it didn't really happen, and you just confirmed it did. So let me ask you this then, okay? Because I want to kind of dig in a little bit into women's, issues, women's experiences, women's rights. What were some of the experiences that women did experience throughout all of this process?
Like during World War II, would you say?
Yep.
Like, so specifically, I can speak a little bit to the Finnish women during the Winter War and the continuation war between Finland and Russia, because that's what I really dug into. And so what was fascinating to me was that Lotta Svärd organization formed before the war. But when the war started, they really had to mobilize and gather, like, more women were brought into the fold, and you name it, whatever needed to be done on the home front was happening. So, when the soldiers are fighting the war, they need to be fed, they need to be clothed. Women were knitting gloves with trigger fingers so that you would have your trigger finger open. So, so they were designing like gloves for that purpose. They were writing letters. They were, like I said earlier, preparing the bodies of the dead to go home. They were nurses. They were, there was some women who were, lookout, I forgot what the word is, like surveillance, and, watching the sky for possible bombers. They were, working as telegraph operators. You name it, the women were doing it. So they were so essential to the war effort. But sort of quietly behind the scenes, because the men were out front fighting, and they were, doing what they could to bolster them up. And so, there are so many. Even they had like young Lottas, like little Lottas, which were young girls who were maybe not old enough to be full Lottas, but they still learned and participated in like sewing and creating things so that they could be sent to the soldiers. So I found it really fascinating because these are things I didn't know about. Like, what do women do during wartime? Well, like, we're getting those stories now. And I think that's so fascinating. And it tells me, just like the men who stood up and said, no, we're not going to take this, and we're going to go and fight, and volunteered and all the things, the women feel just as strongly about their home countries, about protecting, about bolstering up their the war efforts. So I just found it really fascinating because it shows this strength. In Finnish, there's a very important word. I talk about it a lot. It's called sisu. Have you heard that word before? Okay, well, I'm going to tell you. Sisu
No.
is SISU is a word. It's kind of like grit, kind of, but it goes beyond grit. So it's strength, courage, determination in the face of adversity. But some people say like it starts where grit ends. So even if you think whatever you're trying to do is not going to go forward, that you're not going to be successful, you do it anyway, right? So, for instance, if you think of Finland as being a very small country and Russia being this giant country with better military and more individuals, and Finland had like very aged weaponry, they were not going to give up their country. Like they were standing against Russia. And they did everything they could, and the women stepped forward to do that too. So that's that idea of sissy, right? You just don't give up. And it's this kind of Finnish concept that I think we all have sissy, but it's this Finnish cultural concept that has been around for generations and generations and generations. And if you're Finnish, you know that word. But if you're not Finnish, that might be a new word for you. But just to know that you have that within you, and when you need it, you can pull that up and be able to move forward, even in the darkest moments of your life.
Wow. That is sad and horrible, but at the same time, a beautiful way, I think, the way you just explained it, and how women, and what they did in their experiences. And I think, like Trevor said earlier, and what you two were talking about earlier, I think it should not go left unsaid as far as women's contributions to World War II, whether it be Finland, whether it be the
Yeah,
U.S. or any country for that
that's
matter.
right. Mhm.
So I do appreciate you doing the research, putting it into literature, and even discussing it on this show, because it's very important. And it's very important that it's talked about. Women's issues is, I think, for a long time has gone. Uh, Women's voices have gone unheard,
Mm,
and I think in the last, I'd say in the last 60 years, we've seen a significant kind of increase in women's voices.
yeah.
So thank you again.
Yeah, no,
Huge
I think
difference.
you're right. There's something about post World War II where women were, realized, oh, like we were needed. We were needed in factories, where we were needed in various roles. And so, of course, there was a time in the 50s where women were kind of back in the kitchen. But, that understanding of the strength and ability and skills and knowledge never went away. And I think we're not where we should be, but we're certainly I do feel like there's movement forward. And I think there's a big reckoning happening right now around the world as more things are getting divulged. We're starting to like I think we're going to see big shifts, but I don't want to predict the future, but I hope.
Right. No, I definitely agree with you. I think it's continuing to shift and shape up, and I think people continue to find voices, and I think voices continue to expand. People like us, even Caucasian guys. I mean, we talk about women's issues, all the time whenever it comes up on this show,
Yeah.
and so we continue to, I think, find ways to support, find ways to allow. So in interesting fact here, interesting story. Uh, Trevor, I don't know if I've told you this or not. We had a young lady on the show who, um, her publicist sent her like multiple podcasts to go on, and all of them were male, and they do not talk to males, right? And they work 99% of their work is only with female, and so they watched our shows and multiple episodes, and multiple other episodes of the other folks, and they were like, what sold me on y'all and only y'all was the fact that you are asked a question, Kev, And I love the way you handled it. And she said, not just with that, but with all the other women you had on your show. In fact, I was asked a question by a guest about what my thoughts were related to LGBTQ something, right? And I'm like, well, my response was, I don't think it's meant for me to be an arbiter of said thing. It's just my job and obligation to support said people and to try to help find a voice and advocate for. Uh, and she was like, "That's what sold me. That was the number one thing that sold me was your response. And number two, you and none of your folks overtalk and overpower the women when they come on your show." And so, to me, having people like yourself who comes on here, talks about women issues, women's experiences, her compliments and comment um, to me, that just makes us continue to strive forward into trying to achieve our main goal and mission. So, uh, thank you, seriously, thank you. It's been a phenomenal thing, and to hear women's perspective and get that firsthand or secondhand experience or what have you through your research, and just it makes me start to tear up
Mhm.
because it's important. It's important.
Thank you. That's really lovely. I appreciate it.
That's an amazing gift because Kevo does not usually do that. And wow, that's a very strong thing to happen. That's part of the spiritual aspect of things working in through this. And it's very important because we like sharing information that we can from everyone and learning something from it. And you shared that in an exponential way today. But we always ask our respected guests, and you're definitely one of them. If there was one thing that you would tell the world, what would be a call to action that you would give the advice to everyone that would help them to develop better understanding into learning things to the level that you have? What's the call to action for you?
That's so good. I love that you asked these questions. So, two things connected. One is um, we really need to, we're in a time in the world where we need truth and we need light and we need accountability. And that every single one of us has that sissy within us. This is a difficult time, and we need to draw out our courage and our determination, and spread the truth, and allow people to be accountable for actions. And then we can start to heal again.
Outstanding. That's using the wonderful KISS method, keeping it simple, silly.
That's right.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you once again for being
Thank
our
you
guest
so
today. We
much.
really appreciate having you today.
Thank you, Trevor. And thank you, Kevin. That was wonderful to chat with you.
Absolutely. And last but not least, okay, if people want to get you to be a guest on their show, maybe get you to be a authoring mentor mentee relationship, maybe hire you, or have you help them critique things, edit things, things like that. Anything related, doesn't matter what it is, mentoring, coaching, what have you. In what ways would they be able to contact you?
The easiest place to go is my website, LisaKovala.bookcoach.com. Lisa with 2 I's. Lisa Kovala. If you look up Lisa Kovala, you should be able to find me, but LisaKovala.bookcoach.com.
Thank you, ma'am. Been an absolute privilege. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Trevor, you did an amazing job leading us. I know I let you ask most of the questions because you haven't been here in a couple of weeks due to your circumstances. So thank you, Trev. Absolutely, you blew it out the park today. Folks, that brings us to the end of our show. Check us out we're across all social media platforms. We're
Any
doesn't-
social media platform. I think it's cool.
right. I mean, we're basically across the. I think we're not on Mastodon, which I don't even know much about Mastodon, but that's okay. Blue Sky, Threads, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, formerly known as, or used to be known as Twitter, Apple, Spotify, Odyssey, YouTube, Listen Notes. I mean, we're across the board.
iHeartRadio, Amazon, Deezer.
Pandora.
We're all over the place.
Yeah, 40 something odd platforms. So, hey, listen, folks, check us out, subscribe to us. It is free to subscribe, it is free to follow us on all platforms. We don't do this for money. If you want to buy us a coffee, send us an email.
Nope.
That'll be fine. We will accept the coffee. I ain't gonna be like Trevor. Buy us a coffee. I love coffee. Listen, folks, thank you. Again, thank y'all for checking us out and listening. And Miss Lisa, do not hang up. I'm gonna end the live.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Miss Lisa.